1884 to 1899. Post-Capitol boom and the Great Fire. Heading into 1884, enthusiasm reigned over Bismarck's blossoming future, kindled by the long-awaited opening of the Missouri River Bridge and its new role as capital of Dakota Territory. Bismarck prospered in the final years of the 19th century until 1898, when a devastating fire compromised progress while also propelling the city beyond its frontier roots. 1884, Capitol opens. The new territorial capital was occupied at the end of 1884, just in time for the 1885 Legislative Assembly. Architect Buffington of Minneapolis designed the building and more than 4,000 people were involved in its construction. The Capitol was erected at the center of the 160 acres Bismarck donated for its construction. 2 stories of it were built during the winter, requiring bricklayers to maintain a sheet iron stove to keep the mortar from freezing. The Capitol was among the first buildings, if not the first, to be lit by electricity in Dakota Territory. It contained more than 4 miles of steam pipe and 5 tons of carpet. Excavation commenced on August 17, 1883, and the cornerstone was laid on September 5. By January 20 of the following year, 4,000 bricks made of Joliet stone and terracotta had been laid, encased in cement, and all iron work was complete. Initially, only the Capitol's central core, referred to as the tower, was finished. The tower was 92 feet by 153 feet with 3 stories plus a 12-foot high basement. East and west wings attached to the tower consisted of empty shells, to be completed when diminished capacity necessitated expansion. The building later serves as capital of North Dakota upon entering statehood before fire consumes it on December 28, 1930. North Ward School. North Ward School opened in 1884 with 364 students. Its name derives from Bismarck being divided into 3 wards at the time. It replaced the original 2-room schoolhouse located at the site now home to the Provident Building, where the Will School is later erected. North Ward housed all grade levels until the completion of the city's first designated high school building in 1912. North Ward was renamed William Moore School in 1918 after former principal William Moore. Present-day Wilmore Elementary was constructed on the same site, replacing both William Moore School and the similarly named Will School in 1951. The name Wilmore is a combination of the 2 schools it replaced. Webb Brothers. Founded that year as a furniture store, Webb Brothers eventually grew into a successful department store with annual sales nearing $500,000 before closing in December 1945. For 5 years, Webb Brothers was the only dry goods store in Bismarck, and the only furniture store between Jamestown, North Dakota and Glendive, Montana for 12 years. It also housed Bismarck's first funeral parlor. The Webb brothers, William and Philip, came to Bismarck in 1884 from New Jersey and purchased the W. D. Smith & Company furniture store at 514 Main Avenue. Soon after, Webb Brothers relocated to 223 Main Avenue. In 1892, the Webbs acquired the Dan Eisenberg dry goods store inside the Dakota block. 2 years later, they consolidated their furniture and dry goods stores inside the Raymond block. It was then that they began conceiving the idea of organizing a department store. In reorganizing into a department store, the Webbs once again relocated at the end of 1898, this time leasing 75 feet of the eastern side of the newly completed Mackenzie block, later known as the Webb Brothers block, at the corner of Main Avenue and 4th Street, where it remained for the rest of its existence. It expanded with a 2-story brick storehouse addition in 1906 to house its furniture and funeral undertaking operations. Philip retired in 1921, but William continued to operate the business. In 1928, Webb Brothers exited the dry goods business, fully transitioning into a traditional department store while also expanding their furniture selection. That same year also transferred ownership to William's sons, Philip and Robert. Webb Brothers closed in December 1945. Following Webb Brothers, the building underwent major renovation to house Sears, who remained at the site until relocating to Gateway Mall in 1979. Conlon's Furniture occupied the building until 2004. Since then, it has housed Zimmerman's Furniture. 1885, First Hospital and Territorial Prison. In 1885, today's St. Alexius was established inside the Lambourne Hotel building to become the first hospital in Dakota Territory. That same year, the Territorial Prison, now known as the State Penitentiary, was also established. Across the river in Mandan, the original Morton County Courthouse was completed. The brick building was destroyed by fire in 1941. Lambourne Hotel and St. Alexius Hospital. The Lambourne Hotel was financed and built by Richard Mellon, of the famous Mellon brothers, and political boss Alexander Mackenzie. It was named after Colonel Charles B. Lambourne, who was a land commissioner for the Northern Pacific Railroad. Construction on the building was completed in December 1884 in anticipation of the upcoming Legislative Assembly. For reasons unconfirmed, it appears that the Lambourne Hotel never actually opened for business. Instead, the first hospital in Dakota Territory was established at the building. With the help of Abbot Alexius Edelbrock, the Benedictine sisters purchased the former Lambourne Hotel building on April 14, 1885. After remodeling the building and acquiring the necessary equipment and supplies, the hospital admitted its first patients on May 6. Total cost for the building and equipment was about $30,000. They treated 65 patients in its first year, despite no formal medical training, at a standard fee of $1 per day. Chief Sitting Bull, future President Theodore Roosevelt, and Medora de Maurice were noted patients of the Frontier Hospital. It operated for a short time as the Lambourne Hospital before adopting the St. Alexius moniker in 1887. St. Alexius progressed under the administration of Sister Boniface, born Agnes Timmins, some sources spell it Tummins or Tommins, who took the position in 1892. She was instrumental in evolving it from a primitive, barely equipped frontier hospital into a well-funded modern health care facility. She replaced coal stoves with steam heat, installed telephones, and replaced handbells with electronic call bells. She administered St. Alexius until retiring in 1937, the same year of her death. St. Alexius remained in the Lambourne building until completing the oldest section of its current facility in 1915. The former Lambourne Hotel was demolished as part of an urban renewal project in 1972. Prior to demolition, the building housed Bismarck Business College. The building was located on the northeast corner of 6th Street and Main Avenue, where Radisson Hotel now stands. Wachter Dray and Transfer Company. Gottlieb Charles Wachter arrived in Bismarck as a butcher in 1881. Immigrating with his family from Germany when he was 16 years old, Charles, as he was known, was born in 1866 and previously lived in Pennsylvania before moving to Bismarck. It was in 1885 that Wachter founded the footings of the family's business empire, the Wachter Dray and Transfer Company. With the success of his draying business, Wachter later expanded operations, including farming and ranching. The Wachters eventually acquired expansive real estate holdings, owning most of the land south of Front Avenue between Washington Street and 12th Street. It was here that the Wachter family found incomparable prosperity, first as farmers and ranchers, later as real estate developers when Garrison Dam's completion afforded new opportunities. The Wachters also held significant land holdings in North Bismarck, Morton County, Oliver County, and Sheridan County. Over the decades, members of the Wachter family have fully owned or held ownership stake in numerous businesses, including Kirkwood Plaza, Kirkwood Motor Inn, Bank of Kirkwood, First National Bank, Dakota Sand and Gravel, House of Bottles, Kirkwood Hardware Hank, and Big Boy. 2 schools have been named Wachter, and the family has donated land for the Bismarck Civic Center, Dorothy Moses Elementary, Pebble Creek Golf Course, Wachter Aquatics Center, Schomerg Ice Arena, and the current Joint Law Enforcement Center on South 7th Street. 1886, Waterworks. Alexander Mackenzie established the city's first water system in 1886, pumping unfiltered river water through a system of pipes. It was problematic, frequently clogging with river silt or becoming frozen in the winter. Bismarck's waterworks remained a privately owned system until 1923, when residents passed a bond measure to acquire the water department and fund a filtration plant. Edmund Hughes, whose father worked with Alexander Mackenzie to secure Bismarck as capital, became a pumping engineer in 1893 for Mackenzie's waterworks. Soon after, he became a boss supervising laborers installing water mains. Mackenzie later appointed Hughes as the plant's superintendent. Meigs Street renamed Broadway. Citizens petitioned to change the name of Meigs Street to Broadway, historically referred to as Broadway in many references, which is accepted and adopted in March 1886. The change was purely marketing, believing it to be more appropriate for the business district. The street's original namesake was Major Montgomery Meigs, who was a survey engineer for Northern Pacific Railway between 1870–1873. He assisted in laying out Fort McKean, later Fort Abraham Lincoln, and likely assisted in laying out present-day Bismarck. He was also one of the first private citizens to own land in present-day Bismarck. 1887, Electric Service. While Hughes Electric is often credited with pioneering local electric service, it was Charlie Thompson and Charles Gilman who were first granted authority, known as franchise rights. It was in his role as general contractor in constructing the Capitol that Thompson acquired an 8-light plant from Vandepoel Electric Light Company in 1883 and wired the Capitol for electric light to be powered by these generators. For the sake of historic comparison, this was only 4 years after Thomas Edison invented the first viable incandescent light and the year after he founded his namesake Edison Electric Illuminating Company. The first public power plant was completed in June of 1887, along with 100 electric poles, and service began June 15. At first, service was extremely limited. The city government was the first subscriber, implementing 9 arc lights of 1,200 candle power each to artificially light its streets. Burleigh County also installed 2 street lights, at the courthouse and jail. The Sheridan House was the first private building to be lit, in 1888. Hughes Electric is credited with expanding local electric service to the masses. It was founded by Edmund A. Hughes and his father, Alexander Hughes. While Alexander, prominent in his own right, was company president, it was young Edmund who had the strong interest in electrical service and chiefly operated Hughes Electric. Some sources attribute Hughes Electric with being first in the nation to produce an electric stove, although there are competing claims. Edmund's brother, George, is credited with the invention and did serve as an executive with Hotpoint and General Electric, principal appliance manufacturers. On December 31, 1894, Bismarck granted Hughes Electric a 20-year electric franchise. The agreement was vetoed by Mayor Leslie on January 8, 1895 and repealed, allegedly in collusion with Alexander Mackenzie. Former allies, the Hughes men had fallen out of favor with Mackenzie, who endorsed someone else for the franchise. This erupted a long-lasting adversarial relationship between the men. The city commission overruled Leslie's veto, but that didn't end the conflict. Like a pack of schoolyard bullies, the Mackenzie gang were unrelenting in their childish pursuit against Hughes. Later that year, the commission voted to expunge any record of the incident. Under the direction of Commissioner Edward Patterson, a Mackenzie ally who would soon become mayor, the commission introduced a new ordinance repealing the original that granted Hughes the franchise. Believing in his legal authority to prevail, Hughes proceeded with erecting electric poles and building a power plant on the northwest corner of Thayer Avenue and 4th Street, on the spot now occupied by the Ward's building. The wires were subsequently trimmed and the electric poles cut down, apparently under orders from Patterson and Mackenzie. In response, a lawsuit endured into 1896, when Mackenzie's efforts to undermine Hughes were deemed unconstitutional. Judge Amidon nullified the repealing ordinance, affording Hughes Electric the original contract, and granted an injunction that restrained the city from interfering. That year, a larger 24-hour power plant began operating on the corner of 3rd Street and Front Avenue. Hughes Electric expanded quickly, adding Fargo and other cities to its portfolio, eventually serving 35 towns. In 1900, Hughes purchased half interest in Mandan Electric Company, which was fully absorbed in 1925. By that year, Hughes provided electricity to roughly 25% of the state. Edmund Hughes also recognized the importance of North Dakota's vast lignite coal deposits, particularly as a fuel source for his vast electrical empire, and invested heavily in the industry. By 1912, his Washburn Coal Company was the largest lignite mine in the world. He added other mines to his portfolio, including Knife River Mining Company, which produced 1,500 tons of coal per day. Hughes Electric and its subsidiaries were purchased by United Power and Light in 1928, which later merged with Northern P&L based in Mobridge, South Dakota before being sold to Montana Dakota Utilities in 1945. Blizzard and first graduating class. 1887 opened with a 10-day blizzard that buries the region, at the end of January. While not among the strongest winter storms to hit Bismarck-Mandan, it remains one of the longest. In fact, a January 24 article mentions that only 4 or 5 inches of snow were present. By January 31, a warm-up had already melted most of the snow. Bismarck graduated its first graduating class, consisting of just 2 students, Amelia Hansen and Jeanette Ward, with the commencement being widely attended at the Athenaeum. 8 students were listed as seniors that year, but only 2 apparently graduated. It was 15 years since Linda Slaughter established the city's first school. 1889, statehood. North Dakota and its southern counterpart were formally admitted to the Union as states on November 2, 1889, when Dakota Territory was split at the 49th parallel. Bismarck assumed the role as capital of North Dakota, a role it held for Dakota Territory since 1883. North Dakota's journey to statehood was lengthy and, had early efforts proven successful, the state would have a different identity. Rumblings of splitting Dakota Territory had been ongoing for over a decade. As early as 1872, United States Senator Ramsey of Minnesota introduced a bill to divide the territory at the 46th parallel. A new territory of Ojibwe, in the northern half, would have been formed as a result. Another contending name for the northern half was Pembina. While the United States Senate did pass the bill, it faced a resounding defeat in the House of Representatives. Unnecessary cost, low population, and political maneuvering were justifications against the bill. There was also an effort to admit Dakota Territory, apparently as a whole, into statehood in 1883, the same year that the capital was relocated from Yankton to Bismarck. While statehood was strongly approved by citizens, the United States Congress rejected the application due to poor voter turnout. A dry state. It may surprise some to learn that North Dakota entered the Union as a dry state, abolishing liquor in a state whose towns once housed more saloons than any other business type. This put many longtime legitimate establishments out of business, including Asa Fisher's Enterprises and the Milwaukee Brewery. Alcohol won't be re-legalized in North Dakota until national prohibition ends in 1933. 1890s, progress slows. Progress was slow during the 1890s, coming down from the post-capital boom that commenced in 1883 and hastened by the Panic of 1893. Lasting about 4 years, it was the nation's worst economic depression to that point, even greater than 1873. The crisis forced Northern Pacific Railway into its second bankruptcy, resulting in competing railroad tycoon James Hill acquiring controlling interest. The economic woes of the decade can be attributed to President McKinley's successful triumph and ultimately President Theodore Roosevelt's succession following McKinley's assassination in 1901. Many of its earliest pioneers left during the decade, including W. B. Shaw, Dr. Henry Porter, Linda Slaughter, and Asa Fisher. One of the most significant events in Bismarck's history occurred at the end of the decade, which would usher in a modern Bismarck. 1890, Mandan adds second school. In 1890, Mandan converted a private residence into its second dedicated schoolhouse on the West End near Main Street and Mitchell Avenue, today's 8th Avenue Northwest. Classes were once held in a log cabin owned by J. Mitchell. For the past 3 years, the city had been utilizing space in the Vinton building for additional classrooms to supplement its original schoolhouse, built in 1882. The new schoolhouse contained one classroom on each of 2 levels. First and second grades were on the main level, third through fifth grades above. 1892, State Bank of Morton County. The State Bank of Morton County, Mandan's third bank, established in January 1892. Its 22x30-foot headquarters became erected on the northeast corner of Main Street and 1st Avenue Northwest. It still stands today, although its glory days are well behind. Farmers Equity State Bank of Mandan acquired the bank in 1920. 1893, Nils Lovin. Nils Hansson Lovin arrived in Bismarck in 1893. His name may not be known to most, but he became a leading contractor constructing many of Bismarck's homes and iconic buildings over several decades. Lovin also served on various local governing boards, including the City Commission and Planning Commission. Post-mortem, his sons Oscar and Carl continued in the business until the 1950s. Carl Lovin later served as an architect for Ritterbusch Brothers. Until 1901, Lovin was partnered with Matt Gleinberg and jointly operated under the name Gleinberg and Lovin. Among the most noted buildings constructed by Lovin were St. Mary's Church, the Wards Building, and ongoing projects at the State Penitentiary and Fort Lincoln, now United Tribes Technical College. For some time, Lovin and his sons held an exclusive contract for all Standard Oil stations in the region. A master at decorative crown molding and wood carving, Lovin often lent his talents to other local builders. In 1999, his daughter-in-law, Carl Lovin's widow, donated an estimated $85,000 worth of furniture handmade by Nils Lovin to the Bismarck Art and Galleries Association. Lovin was born in either Lederup or Ingelstorp, Sweden in 1866 and grew up in Ystad. At age 22, he immigrated to the United States and settled in St. Paul, where he first entered the construction and contracting business. It was there that he met his future wife, Ingrid, Annie Lindell, who was serving as a maid in the James Hill house. Annie's family originally settled in Red Wing, Minnesota upon immigrating from Sweden. The two married in 1893, the same year they relocated to Bismarck. Lovin's sister and her husband, Mary and Johannes, John, Carlson, joined Nils in Bismarck upon immigrating from Sweden in 1901. They were not involved in the contracting business. John was a dairy farmer. Lovin died in January 1932 of a cerebral hemorrhage from complications of a stroke that had paralyzed his right side. He was survived by his wife and their 2 sons. 1894, Camp Hancock houses U.S. Weather Bureau. Camp Hancock began housing the U.S. Weather Bureau in 1894. It remained there until 1940. 1895, Fort Lincoln replaces Fort Abraham Lincoln. After almost 20 years, the military abandoned Fort Abraham Lincoln in 1891. Located south of Mandan, the fort was instrumental in guaranteeing Bismarck's formation and early survival. It is best known as General Custer's post upon his death. The similarly named Fort Lincoln became established south of Bismarck 4 years later, in 1895. Even though the military abandons the fort in 1913, it would gain notoriety as an internment camp during World War II. Following World War II, the Army Corps of Engineers used Fort Lincoln as the headquarters for the Garrison Dam project until its completion in 1954. In 1966, the government declared it surplus, and in 1969, it became United Tribes Technical College, which remains today. 1898, the Great Fire. By 1898, Bismarck had grown substantially, but was fundamentally still a frontier town. Most of the buildings to this point were constructed of wood, which provided endless fuel to a fire that devastated Bismarck on August 8, 1898. It was Bismarck's first significant fire since March 1877, and on a level never seen since. The fire quickly spread from one structure to the next, leaving most of Bismarck's downtown in ruin. Heavy winds helped to spread flames as far north as the capital. The total loss was estimated at nearly $500,000, in 1898 figures. The fire was discovered shortly before 9 p.m. on August 8, when smoke was seen coming from a Northern Pacific freight warehouse. The fire quickly spread uncontrolled. Main Avenue was first to be consumed, but then it spread to Broadway and the residential section. The heat was so intense that it melted even stronger brick buildings into heaps of charred brick, first by shattering their windows and then engulfing the interior. Making a bad situation worse, gunpowder that was stored inside the freight warehouse and other buildings triggered explosions. According to a Bismarck Daily Tribune article dated August 10, an explosion at the warehouse released the flames into adjacent buildings. Simultaneous with an explosion in the freight warehouse, an immense section of the roof was lifted high into the air, and the flames, which had been checked for a time, leaped forward with renewed vigor and fury. The telegraph office was among the first destroyed, cutting off chances of outside assistance. A desperate distress call to neighboring Mandan was never received. Even so, Mandan quickly became aware of the massive inferno lighting to its east and dispatched firemen to assist. The fire was mostly extinguished by midnight. During those 3 hours that the fire raged, however, 2 entire square blocks were left in absolute ruin, the majority of Bismarck's commercial district. Winds carried flames as far north as the capital, and residences located at least 6 blocks from downtown were also damaged or destroyed. Among the most notable structures damaged or destroyed by the fire included the Northern Pacific Railroad Depot, Mellon Bank, Merchants Bank, residences of Alexander Mackenzie and the Webb Brothers Dry Goods, U.S. Post Office, U.S. Survey General's Office, Bismarck Daily Tribune Building, and the massive First National Bank block, the highest valued loss. Tribune/Hoskins Block, today's KFYR-TV building. The Bismarck Tribune constructed the first section of the building that today houses KFYR-TV in the aftermath of the 1898 fire. As announced on September 12, 1898, the Tribune described it as a first-class modern print shop. Previously housing the central block, the lot was purchased from the now famous Mellon brothers, who were early investors in Bismarck. The Tribune occupied it until 1919. Owned by R.D. Hoskins, Capitol Bookstore was also established in the building that same year, and the Hoskins retail store, later as Hoskins Meyer, will remain there until 1997. KFYR-TV is the successor to that business. While the original building was about the same depth as it is today, 140 feet, the frontage width was about half the size. Except for the front 4th Street facing portion, which was street level and housed Capitol Bookstore, the building was essentially what would today be described as split level with a 20-foot high basement and 1 story above. The building was usually referred to as the Tribune/Hoskins Block or similar variations, with R.D. Hoskins managing the facility on behalf of Bismarck Trust Company. Through expansions in 1908 and 1913, the height of the building was extended to include a 2nd story, and the entire building block was enlarged to 140 x 75 feet, which is essentially the building's current size, except that the building was U-shaped with a large open section facing the alley that is later filled in by future expansion. Arthur Van Horn designed both of these, but it is unconfirmed who designed the original structure. After that, the building will remain mostly unchanged until 1949, when it was renovated and expanded to its present-day appearance. Hoskins Meyer. In 1898, Robert Diamond Hoskins founded Hoskins Cigar, Stationery, and Flower Store at 213 Main Avenue, directly across from the railroad depot. Hoskins also owned Capitol Bookstore, founded that same year inside the recently completed Tribune block on the northwest corner of 4th Street and Broadway Avenue. In 1909, after the Tribune block's expansion, he relocated his original namesake store there. Philip Meyer, husband to Hoskins' daughter Etta, eventually partnered in the business. It became Hoskins Meyer in 1922. The retailer was one of the first in the region to offer photofinishing products and services. Its first greenhouses were built in 1900, and as time progressed, Floral increasingly became the center of the retail business, but it continued as a film and stationery shop for some time. Those original greenhouses were rebuilt in 1948 after being destroyed by a hailstorm. That same year, the retail operation was sold to Lillian Henline and John Wachtler. Wesley Bower, who started as a delivery person in 1948, bought out Wachtler's interest in 1964, then Henline's interest in 1974. Hoskins Meyer vacated its downtown location in 1997, consolidating operations to its greenhouse at 302 East Avenue East. Hoskins Meyer founded KFYR Radio in 1925. The resulting Meyer Broadcasting eventually evolved into one of North Dakota's largest privately owned companies, encompassing several North Dakota radio and television stations, along with Bismarck Mandan's cable provider. The Meyer family maintained ownership of the broadcasting company until 1998. KFYR-TV still remains headquartered in the same building once home to the bookstore-turned-flower shop that preceded it. Cupid's Grocery, Cowan Drug Building erected. You may not know it upon first glance, but today's Cowan Building was first built in 1898, replacing a wooden structure destroyed by the Great Fire of that year on the same site. The original brick building was only 2 stories tall when it officially opened to the public on November 17, 1898. Charles Cupid's constructed the building to house his grocery store, which he founded in 1881 after previous failed attempts. The Cupid's store occupied both floors and was partially lit by a skylight. It was hailed as the most extensive and handsomest grocery store west of St. Paul. Cupid's retired in 1915, selling his grocery store to A.W. Lucas Company, who continued operating the Cupid's grocery store from the Lucas storefront directly across the street until closing it in 1921. Cowan Drug opened in 1907, but didn't relocate there until 1916, the year after Cupid's grocery closed. Cowan purchased the building in 1921. It renovated and expanded to 5 stories in 1955 to its present-day appearance. Other occupants in the building have included Bridal and More from November 1994 until the late 2000s. Since 2017, it has been home to the Rejuvenation Place. Professional office space is located on the upper floors. Webb Brothers evolves, A.W. Lucas established. In response to unprecedented growth since its founding as a furniture store in 1884, incorporating dry goods in 1892, Webb Brothers reorganized into a department store in 1898. It was at that time that the Webbs leased 75 feet of the eastern side of the newly completed Mackenzie Block, later known as the Webb Brothers Block, at the corner of Main and 4th, where it remained until shuttering in 1945. It expanded with a 2-story brick storehouse addition in 1906 to house its furniture and funeral undertaking operations. 1 year later, in 1899, Arthur Lucas and William O'Hara opened a clothing and dry goods store at 114 North 4th Street. In the belief that added competition would draw more shoppers to Bismarck, the Webbs aided Lucas and O'Hara's new retail venture. Lucas and O'Hara's partnership didn't last long, with Lucas purchasing full ownership of the company in 1902. Both retailers prospered for decades. Webb Brothers closed up shop in 1945, to be replaced by Sears. A.W. Lucas thrived decades more, operating numerous downtown storefronts, sometimes simultaneously, until relocating to Gateway Mall in 1979. Lucas shuttered in 1982, to be replaced